A widowed millionaire was dining alone in a luxury restaurant, remembering the wife he lost years ago. Suddenly, a poor girl came in hungry and said innocently, "My mother has a ring just like yours." At that moment, he felt the floor disappear, as he realized that the ring was his late wife's alone. Not knowing whether to cry or smile, he discovered that the girl was his daughter and his wife was alive somewhere. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. Ethan Mitchell was known in Seattle's tech circles as the man who never missed. The 42-year-old CEO of Horizon Tech had built his empire from a small startup in his garage to a billion-dollar company in just over a decade. Tonight, he stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his sleek downtown penthouse, staring at his reflection against the backdrop of the Seattle skyline. Rain streaked down the glass, distorting the city lights into watery smears of color. Something felt off. Despite the board meeting earlier that day, where they'd closed a record-breaking deal, despite the congratulatory emails still flooding his inbox, despite the financial security most people would kill for, Ethan felt nothing. A vast emptiness had settled in his chest, growing more pronounced each day. He ran his hand over his precisely trimmed beard and turned away from the window. His penthouse was immaculate. Minimalist furniture in shades of gray and black, abstract art pieces selected by his interior designer, and not a single personal photograph or memento in sight. Everything was perfectly curated, just like his life. Ethan checked his watch. 3:17 a.m. Another sleepless night. He'd been having them more frequently lately, waking up in cold sweats with a sense of something missing. His therapist had suggested it might be loneliness, but Ethan had dismissed the idea. He didn't need people. He had success. He had respect. He had everything he'd ever worked for. So why did it all feel so hollow? The next morning, Ethan walked through the drizzling Seattle rain toward Horizon Tech's headquarters, a gleaming glass tower in the heart of downtown. He'd chosen to walk the 15 blocks from his penthouse rather than take his Tesla, hoping the cool air might clear his head. As he turned the corner onto Pike Street, something unusual caught his eye. Two small girls with identical faces sat, huddled on a bench under the awning of a closed cafe. They couldn't have been more than 6 years old, with untamed honey-brown hair that fell in wild curls around their solemn faces. Between them sat a cardboard box with a small, squirming puppy inside. A handwritten sign propped against the box read, "Pay what you can. We're desperate." Ethan normally would have walked past without a second glance. Children selling puppies on street corners wasn't his concern, but something about their serious expressions, so incongruous on such young faces, made him pause. "Shouldn't you two be in school?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. The girls looked up in unison, their eyes a striking shade of green, widening slightly. "Mom's sick," one of them said, her voice quiet but steady. "We need money for medicine." "Where are your parents?" Ethan asked, glancing around. Surely they weren't alone. "Dad's not around," the other twin replied matter-of-factly. "And Mum's at home. She doesn't know we took Buddy." Ethan looked at the puppy, a scruffy brown mutt with oversized paws that suggested it would grow into a much larger dog. The animal looked up at him with liquid brown eyes, tilting its head slightly. "How much do you want for him?" Ethan found himself asking. The girls exchanged a look, having clearly not thought that far ahead. $100? One ventured hesitantly. Ethan pulled out his wallet and extracted a $500 bill. "Here," he said, handing it to the more talkative twin. "Take this and go home. It's not safe for you to be out here alone." The girl's eyes grew impossibly wider as they stared at the bill. "Is this real?" the quieter one whispered. "Yes," Ethan said, suddenly uncomfortable with their awe. "Now go home to your mother." Instead of leaving, one of the girls carefully placed the puppy in his hands. "His name is Buddy," she said solemnly. "He likes belly rubs and he's scared of thunder." Before Ethan could protest, the twins had gathered their cardboard box and sign and were hurrying down the street, casting glances back at him every few steps. Ethan stood there, bewildered, holding a squirming puppy in the middle of the sidewalk. As Seattle's business crowd streamed around him, "Wait, He called after them, but the girls had already turned the corner. On impulse, something Ethan rarely acted on, he followed them, careful to keep his distance. The puppy whined in his arms, and Ethan awkwardly patted its head, trying to quiet. The twins moved quickly through the streets, finally entering a pharmacy several blocks away. Ethan waited outside, feeling ridiculous. What was he doing? He had a meeting in 30 minutes. He should call his assistant, have her reschedule, find someone to take this dog. Yet he remained rooted to the spot, the puppy now settled against his expensive cashmere coat. When the girls emerged from the pharmacy, clutching a white paper bag, Ethan ducked into the doorway of a nearby coffee shop. They headed back the way they'd come, but turned down a side street toward a rundown apartment building. Ethan followed at a distance, watching as they punched in a code at the front door and disappeared inside. Curiosity gnawed at him. He approached the building and examined the directory beside the intercom. His eyes scanned the names until they suddenly stopped, his breath catching in his throat. Reynolds S. Apartment 412, Sarah Reynolds. The name hit him like a physical blow. Sarah had been a custodian at Horizon Tech 7 years ago when the EI company was still in its early stages. They'd had a brief relationship, if you could call it that, mostly after-hours encounters in his office, stolen moments in the stairwell. She'd been beautiful, warm, genuine, everything he wasn't. When he'd received his first major promotion, he'd ended things abruptly, believing she wouldn't fit into his new life as an executive. She'd left the company soon after, and he'd never given her another thought, until now. Could those girls be? No, it wasn't possible. He would have known if Sarah was pregnant, wouldn't he? Ethan stood there, the puppy squirming in his arms, as a cold realization washed over him. 7 years ago. The twins looked about 6. The timing matched up perfectly. His phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking his trance. His assistant was calling, probably wondering where he was. The board meeting would be starting in 10 minutes. Victor would be furious if he missed it. Ethan silenced the phone and walked to the flower shop across the street. 10 minutes later, he returned to the apartment building with a modest bouquet and a bag of pastries from the cafe next door. He had no idea what he was doing, but for the first time in years, that didn't terrify him. He punched in the visitor code and entered the building, his heart hammering in his chest as he climbed the stairs to the 4th floor. The puppy had fallen asleep in the crook of his arm, its tiny body warm against his. Standing outside apartment 412, Ethan took a deep breath and knocked. There was a scuffling sound from inside, followed by whispered voices. Then the door opened. A crack, and one of the twins peered out at him. "It's the man who bought Buddy," she called over her shoulder, then opened the door wider. The apartment was small but tidy, with mismatched furniture and walls covered in children's artwork. The Gee. Twins stood side by side, watching him with identical wary expressions. And there, sitting on the couch with a blanket draped over her legs, was Sarah. She looked different, thinner, paler, her once vibrant red hair now dulled and cut short around her face. But her eyes were the same deep green as her daughter's, and they widened in shock when they landed on him. "Ethan?" she whispered, her voice a mix of disbelief and something else he couldn't identify. "What are you doing here?" Before he could answer, the puppy woke up and barked, squirming to get down. Ethan carefully placed it on the floor, where it immediately raced to the girls, who giggled and dropped to their knees to pet it. Ethan began, suddenly at a loss for words. "I think we need to talk." Sarah's gaze hardened as she looked from him to her daughters and back again. "Girls," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, "take Buddy to your room, please. I need to speak with Mr. Mitchell alone." The twins gathered up the puppy and disappeared down a short hallway, closing a door behind them. In the sudden silence, Ethan could hear the pounding of his own heart. Sarah's eyes never left his face. "You haven't changed at all," she said quietly. "You look exactly the same, but I'm not the same person anymore." Ethan swallowed hard, still, clutching the flowers and pastries like shields. "Are they?" He couldn't bring himself to finish the question. Sarah's chin lifted slightly, a gesture of defiance he remembered well. "Yes," she said simply, "they're yours." The world seemed to tilt beneath Ethan's feet. He sank into the nearest chair, the flowers and pastries falling forgotten onto the coffee table. "That's not possible," he said automatically, though deep down he knew it was. The twins had his nose, his jawline. Even the determined set of their small shoulders reminded him of himself as a child. Sarah's laugh was hollow. "I tried to tell you. For months I tried. I called, I emailed, I even sent letters to your office. You never responded." "I never received anything," Ethan said, shaking his head in confusion. "Not a call, not an email, nothing." Sarah's expression shifted from anger to uncertainty. "What do you mean you never received anything? Your secretary, Martha, she said she gave you my messages. She said you weren't interested." A cold weight settled in Ethan's stomach. Martha Jenkins had been his executive assistant during his first years as VP of Operations. She'd been fiercely protective of him, managing his schedule with military precision and zealously screening his calls. "Martha told you I said that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded, eyes searching his face. "She said you were focused on your career and didn't want any complications." She glanced toward the hallway where the girls had disappeared. "After the third time trying to reach you, I gave up. I figured you'd made your choice." Ethan's mind raced. Martha had retired 2 years ago, after 20 years with the company. He'd given her a generous pension, thanking her for her loyalty and dedication. Had she been intercepting Sarah's messages all this time? Had she made this decision for him? "I never knew," he said, his voice raw with a mixture of anger and regret. "I swear to you, Sarah, I never knew about the pregnancy. If I had..." "You would have what?" Sarah challenged, though her voice had lost some of its edge. "Married me, supported us from a distance. What would the great Ethan Mitchell have done if he knew his cleaning lady was carrying his children?" The words stung, but Ethan couldn't blame her for the bitterness. "I don't know," he admitted. "I can't say what I would have done then, but I know what I want to do now." Sarah raised an eyebrow, waiting. "I want to know them," Ethan said simply. "And I want to help you. All of you." Sarah's expression softened, slightly. "You've missed 6 years of their lives, Ethan. You can't just walk in here and expect to become their father overnight." "I know," he said, "but I'd like the chance to try." He paused, looking around the modest apartment. "Are you ill? The girls said they needed money for medicine." Sarah sighed, pulling the blanket tighter around her legs. "Severe anemia. I've been having treatments, but they're expensive, and my insurance only covers part of it. I had to cut back my hours at work, which means less money coming in." She smiled wryly. "I didn't know the girls were planning to sell Buddy. He's a stray they found last week. I told them we couldn't keep him, but they've been hiding him in their room." Ethan nodded, thinking, "Let me pay for your treatments. Please, it's the least I can do." Sarah started to protest, but Ethan held up a hand. "This isn't charity." "Sarah, it's my responsibility. These are my children too." After a long moment, Sarah nodded. "All right, but we need to be clear about expectations. You can't just throw money at us and consider your duty done, and you can't tell the girls you're their father, not yet. They're too young to understand why you've been absent all this time." "I understand," Ethan said, relief washing over him. "I'll follow your lead." A door opened down the hallway and small footsteps approached. The twins appeared, the puppy trotting at their heels. "Can we keep Buddy now?" one of them asked hopefully. Sarah looked at the puppy, then at her daughter's pleading faces and finally at Ethan. A silent communication passed between them. "Yes," Sarah said, "but you two will have to help take care of him." The girls cheered, and the puppy barked as if understanding it had found a home. "Girls," Sarah said, "this is Mr. Mitchell. He's an old friend of mine. He's going to be visiting us sometimes." The twins regarded Ethan with curious eyes. "I'm Lily," said the one who seemed slightly more outgoing. "And that's Emma. We're twins." "It's nice to meet you both," Ethan said, his voice unexpectedly thick with emotion. "I'm Ethan." "Are you Mom's boyfriend?" Emma asked bluntly. Sarah choked on air, and Ethan felt heat rise to his face. No, he said carefully. Just an old friend who wants to help out. The girls seemed to accept this explanation, quickly losing interest in the adults as they returned to playing with Buddy. Later, as Ethan prepared to leave, Sarah walked him to the door while the twins were busy setting up a bed for the puppy, in their room. "I have some conditions," she said quietly. "If you want to be part of their lives, you need to be consistent. No disappearing when it gets difficult or inconvenient. No promises you can't keep." "I understand," Ethan said solemnly. "I won't let them down, or you." Sarah's eyes searched his face. "Why now, Ethan? Why, after all these years of success and wealth, are you suddenly interested in a family?" Ethan thought about his empty penthouse, the sleepless nights, the hollow feeling that no amount of business success could fill, because I finally realized that everything I've been working for means nothing if I have no one to share it with. Back at his office, Ethan sat at his desk, staring unseeing at his computer screen. His mind was still in that small apartment with Sarah and the twins, his daughters. The thought both terrified and exhilarated him. A knock at his door pulled him from his thoughts. Victor Chambers, his business partner and oldest friend, leaned against the doorframe, his expression a mixture of concern and irritation. "Where were you this morning?" Victor asked. "The board was not happy about your absence." "Something came up," Ethan said vaguely. "Family emergency." Victor raised an eyebrow. "Family? Since when do you have family emergencies? Your parents live in Florida and you barely speak to them." Ethan hesitated. Victor had been with him since the beginning, through all the late nights coding in his garage, through the lean years when they could barely make payroll. But Victor had also been the one to encourage Ethan's single-minded focus on the company, applauding his lack of distractions like relationships or family. "It's complicated," Ethan finally said. "I'll tell you about it soon." Victor studied him for a moment, then shrugged. "Whatever it is, get it sorted quickly. We're finalizing the Westbrook acquisition next week, and I need you focused." He tapped the doorframe twice with his knuckles. "Dinner tomorrow at Sullivan's? We can go over the final contract details." "Sure," Ethan agreed, relieved that Victor wasn't pushing further. After Victor left, Ethan pulled out his phone and dialed a number he'd never thought he'd call again. "Hello?" Martha Jenkins answered on the third ring. "Martha, it's Ethan Mitchell," he said, struggling to keep his voice steady. "We need to talk." There was a pause. "Ethan, what a surprise. How are you?" "I'm not calling to catch up," Ethan said coldly. "I just saw Sarah Reynolds today, and her daughters, my daughters." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. When Martha finally spoke, her voice was unrepentant. "I did what was best for you," she said firmly. "That woman would have derailed everything you were working for. You weren't ready for a family, especially not with someone like her." Ethan's grip on his phone tightened. "That wasn't your decision to make. Someone had to look out for your interests," Martha replied. "You were too soft back then, too easily distracted. I protected your future." "You kept my children from me," Ethan said, his voice rising. "For 6 years. And look what you've accomplished in those 6 years," Martha countered. "Horizon Tech is one of the most successful tech companies in the Pacific Northwest. You're wealthy, respected, powerful. Would any of that have happened if you'd been changing diapers and arguing with a girlfriend who cleaned offices for a living?" Ethan's free hand clenched into a fist. "You're wrong, Martha. And what you did wasn't just wrong. It was illegal. You intercepted personal communications. You lied to both of us." "Save the threats," Martha cut in. "We both know you won't pursue this legally. Too messy, too public. Besides, what's done is done. Those girls have lived their whole lives without you. Do you really think you can just step in now and play daddy?" The question hit too close to Sarah's own concerns, and Ethan felt a flicker of doubt. But he pushed it aside, his resolve hardening. "Goodbye, Martha," he said quietly. "You'll be hearing from my lawyers about your pension and benefits." He hung up before she could respond and sat back in his chair, exhaling slowly. Through the glass walls of his office, he could see his employees bustling about, unaware that their CEO's life had just been turned upside down. The next few weeks brought changes to Ethan's life that he could never have anticipated. He arranged for Sarah to receive treatment at Seattle's top hematology clinic, using his connections to get her appointments with specialists who normally had months-long waiting lists. He visited the apartment every other day, bringing groceries, books for the girls and toys for Buddy, who had quickly become attached to him. The twins were wary at first, studying him with identical suspicious gazes that reminded him so much of himself that it was almost unnerving. But children, he discovered, were far more adaptable than adults. By the third visit, Emma was showing him her collection of rocks and feathers, while Lily bombarded him with questions about everything from dinosaurs to how skyscrapers stayed up. "Why don't you have any kids?" Lily asked one rainy afternoon as they sat at the small kitchen table, working on a puzzle together while Sarah rested in her bedroom. Ethan's hands stilled over the puzzle pieces. "I guess I was too busy with work," he answered carefully. "That's silly," Emma chimed in, fitting a piece into place with surprising dexterity. "Work isn't as fun as kids." "You're right about that," Ethan agreed, watching as they bent their heads over the puzzle, their honey-brown curls falling forward in identical waves. A fierce protectiveness washed over him, so strong it almost took his breath away. These were his daughters. The realization struck him anew each time he saw them, each time they laughed or argued or showed him something they'd made at school. They were part of him, yet they'd been living, their lives completely separate from his for 6 years. The thought filled him with a complicated mix of regret, anger, and determination. Sarah watched his interactions with the girls carefully, her initial skepticism gradually giving way to cautious acceptance. She insisted on boundaries. He could visit, but only at predetermined times. He could bring gifts, but nothing extravagant. He could take the girls to the park or for ice cream, but only with her present. Ethan accepted these conditions without complaint. He understood her protectiveness, her fear that he might disappear from their lives as suddenly as he'd appeared. He was determined to prove her wrong. One evening, as they sat on the small balcony of the apartment, watching the sunset while the girls played with Buddy in the living room, Sarah turned to him with a serious expression. "They're starting to get attached to you," she said quietly. "Emma asked this morning if you were coming over today. When I said no, she looked disappointed." Ethan felt a small surge of happiness at this, followed immediately by concern at Sarah's tone. "Isn't that a good thing?" Sarah sighed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's good if you're planning to stick around, but I need to know, Ethan, is this just guilt or novelty? Because once they fully let you in, once they start to depend on you, you can't just walk away when it gets hard or boring or inconvenient." "This isn't guilt or novelty," Ethan said firmly. "These are my daughters, Sarah. I've missed 6 years of their lives because of Martha's interference. I'm not missing anymore." Sarah studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but we still need to be careful about how we handle this. They're at an age where they ask a lot of questions. Eventually, they're going to start wondering about the nature of our relationship and why you're suddenly in our lives." "When do you think we should tell them the truth?" Ethan asked. "Not yet," Sarah said firmly. "Let them get to know you first. Let them build their own relationship with you. When the time is right, we'll tell them together." Ethan agreed, though part of him ached to claim them publicly as his own. To tell the world, "These are my daughters and I'm proud of them." As the weeks passed, Ethan found himself restructuring his entire life around his visits to the small apartment. He delegated more responsibilities at work, shortened his hours, and declined evening business events that would cut into his time with the girls. For the first time in his career, Horizon Tech was not his top priority. Victor noticed the change almost immediately. They were having their weekly lunch at an upscale restaurant near their office when he broached the subject. "Something's going on with you," Victor said, studying Ethan over the rim of his whiskey glass. "You're distracted. You're leaving the office early. You've missed 2 board dinners in the past month. What gives?" Ethan hesitated. He hadn't told anyone at work about Sarah and the twins yet, partly because he was still processing it himself, and partly because he was following Sarah's lead on privacy. "I've been reassessing some priorities," he said carefully. Victor's eyes narrowed. This is about that family emergency from a few weeks ago, isn't it? Come on, Ethan. We've been friends for 15 years. You can tell me what's going on. Ethan took a deep breath. I found out I have children, he said simply. Twin daughters. They're 6. Victor's whiskey glass froze halfway to his mouth. You what? Ethan explained the situation, leaving out the details about Martha's deception, watching as Victor's expression shifted from shock to disbelief to calculation. So let me get this straight, Victor said when Ethan finished. Your ex-fling from 7 years ago shows up with 2 kids and says they're yours, and you just believe her? No paternity test, no legal verification, nothing? They're mine, Ethan said firmly. One look at them and there's no question. Victor leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. Even if they are yours, why deal with this now? You've built an incredible life, Ethan. The company is on the verge of the biggest acquisition in our history. Why complicate things with a ready-made family drama? Because they're my daughters, Ethan said, a hardness entering his voice. And Sarah isn't asking for anything. In fact, she was reluctant to accept my help at all. For now, Victor muttered. But trust me, eventually she'll see dollar signs. Women like that always do. Women like what? Ethan asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Victor waved, a dismissive hand. You know what I mean. Working class, struggling financially. She's probably been waiting for the right moment to approach you, figuring your guilt would make you an easy mark. Ethan set down his fork with deliberate care. Sarah didn't approach me. I found her by accident, and she's not looking for a payout. She's a good mother who's been raising our daughters alone because my assistant intercepted all her attempts to contact me. Victor's eyebrows shot up. Martha, are you serious? Deadly, Ethan confirmed. And I'd appreciate it if you kept your opinions about Sarah to yourself. You don't know her. Victor held up his hands in a placating gesture. Fine, fine, but as your friend and business partner, I have to ask. How is this going to affect Horizon? The Westbrook deal is happening in 2 weeks. We need you 100% focused. I can handle both, Ethan assured him, though privately he was less certain. For the first time in his career, he was finding it difficult to care about business deals and profit margins when compared to the importance of his newfound family. That evening, Ethan arrived at Sarah's apartment with a bag of Chinese takeout and a children's book about a puppy that reminded him of Buddy. The girls greeted him with excited hugs, a recent development that still made his heart skip a beat, and immediately dragged him to the living room to show him the fort they'd built out of blankets and chairs. You have to crawl in with us, Lily insisted, tugging on his hand. Ethan glanced down at his tailored suit and expensive shoes, then at their eager faces. Let me just change first, he said, retrieving the gym bag he'd started bringing with him that contained casual clothes. 10 minutes later, dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, Ethan found himself crammed into a blanket fort with 2 6-year-olds and a puppy, a flashlight illuminating their faces as Emma solemnly read aloud from a picture book, occasionally stopping to let Ethan or Lily supply the voices for different characters. Looking at their faces in the dim light, Ethan felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him. How had he lived for so long without knowing these little people existed? How had he ever thought his life was full when it had been so empty? After dinner, when the twins were in bed, Ethan helped Sarah wash the dishes, a comfortable silence between them. You're good with them, Sarah said finally, handing him a plate to dry. Better than I expected, to be honest. They make it. Easy, Ethan replied. They're amazing kids, Sarah. You've done an incredible job raising them. Sarah's hands stilled in the soapy water. It hasn't been easy, she admitted quietly. There were times I didn't know how we'd make it through the month. Times I was so exhausted I cried in the bathroom after they went to sleep. She looked up at him, her green eyes serious. But I never regretted having them, not for a second. I'm sorry I wasn't there, Ethan said, the words inadequate for the depth of his regret. I should have been. I would have been, if I'd known. Sarah nodded, accepting his words without comment. After a moment, she asked, How's your work going? The girl said you had to make an important phone call during your visit yesterday. Ethan sighed, thinking of the mounting emails and tasks he'd been putting off. It's fine, busy. We're acquiring another company soon, so there's a lot of preparation involved. Don't neglect your business because of us, Sarah said firmly. The girls and I have managed for 6 years. We don't expect you to rearrange your entire life overnight. But I want to, Ethan said simply. For the first time, I'm realizing there are more important things than quarterly earnings reports and stock prices. Sarah gave him a small smile, but there was concern in her eyes. Just be careful, Ethan. Don't make promises, to yourself or to the girls, that your lifestyle can't sustain. It's better to be honest about what you can give than to disappoint them later. Ethan wanted to protest, to assure her that he was all in, 100% committed to being part of their lives. But he understood her caution. Trust, once broken, took time to rebuild, and he had a lot of lost time to make up for. Theme. Westbrook acquisition was scheduled for a Thursday, culminating in a formal dinner with the board of directors and major shareholders from both companies. It was the kind of event Ethan normally thrived in, champagne flowing, powerful people exchanging pleasantries that masked strategic maneuvers, deals being cemented with handshakes and knowing glances. But this Thursday was also Emma and Lily's school play, a production of The Tortoise and the Hare in which Lily played the tortoise and Emma was a narrator. They'd been practicing their lines with Ethan for weeks, giggling when he attempted to mimic the slow, steady voice of the tortoise. "You have to come," Lily had insisted the previous weekend, her small hands clasped together in earnest supplication. "I'm going to walk super slow, just like you taught me." "I wouldn't miss it," Ethan had promised, his heart swelling at her excitement. Now sitting in his office with Victor pacing in front of his desk, that promise weighed heavily on him. "You can't be serious," Victor said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "The Westbrook dinner has been planned for months. Everyone will be there, the board, the shareholders, the press. It's the biggest night in our company's history." "I know," Ethan said, maintaining his calm. "And you'll handle it brilliantly. I'll be there for the signing in the afternoon, but I have a prior commitment for the evening." "A school play?" Victor's voice dripped with disbelief. "You're choosing a bunch of kids stumbling around in animal costumes over $100 million acquisition." "I'm choosing my daughters," Ethan corrected, his tone hardening. "And yes, that's exactly what I'm doing." Victor ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair, exhaling sharply. "Look, I get that you're going through some kind of midlife awakening here. But there's a time and place for family stuff, Ethan. This is business. This is what we've worked for our entire careers. It's just one dinner, Victor. The deal will still happen whether I'm at the celebratory dinner or not." "It's not just about the deal," Victor insisted, leaning forward to place his palms flat on Ethan's desk. "It's about perception. What message does it send when the CEO doesn't even show up to his own company's biggest celebration? How do you think that looks to the board, to our investors, to the Westbrook team?" Ethan met his partner's gaze steadily. "I'm not missing the signing or any of the substantive parts of the deal. I'm missing a dinner where people will drink too much and congratulate themselves on making money. I think the company will survive." Victor straightened, his expression shifting from anger to something more calculating. "These kids have you wrapped around their finger already, don't they? 6 weeks ago you didn't even know they existed. Now you're willing to risk the company's reputation for them." "I'm not risking anything," Ethan said firmly. "And yes, they're important to me. They're my daughters, Victor." "And what about your other children?" Victor asked, gesturing broadly to indicate the office beyond the glass walls. "The 300 employees who depend on you for their livelihoods? The company you built from nothing? Don't they deserve your loyalty too?" The question struck a nerve, but Ethan maintained his resolve. "I can be loyal to both my family and my company. It doesn't have to be either or." Victor studied him for a long moment, then shook his head. "I hope you're right," he said quietly. "For all our sakes." He moved toward the door, then paused, his hand on the handle. "You're different," he observed. "This woman and these kids, they're changing you. And I'm not sure it's for the better." After Victor left, Ethan sat back in his chair, a heaviness settling in his chest. Victor's words had struck closer to home than he cared to admit. He was changing, or perhaps returning to a version of himself that had been buried under years of ambition and single-minded focus on success. He picked up his phone and dialed Sarah's number. "Hey," she answered, her voice warm. "I was just about to call you. Emma's been asking if you can help her practice her lines one more time before the play tomorrow." "Of course," Ethan said, smiling despite the tension lingering from his conversation with Victor. "I'll come by after work, but I wanted to make sure we're still on for tomorrow. The play starts at 7, right?" "Yes, but you should try to come by 6:30, Sarah said. "They need to be there early to get into costume, and they really want you to see them before they go on stage." "I'll be there," Ethan promised. "There's been some pushback at work about me missing an important dinner, but I've handled it." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Ethan," Sarah said carefully, "if you need to be at your dinner—" "I don't," he interrupted firmly. "The dinner isn't important. The play is." He could almost hear Sarah's smile through the phone. "They'll be so happy you're coming. They've been telling everyone at school about their friend Mr. Ethan who's coming to see them perform." After they hung up, Ethan stared out his office window at the Seattle skyline, thinking about how much his priorities had shifted in just a few weeks. 6 months ago, nothing would have kept him from a major business dinner. Now, nothing would keep him from his daughter's school play. The next day, Ethan left the office at 5, immediately after the signing ceremony for the Westbrook acquisition. Victor had been coldly professional throughout the proceedings, his disapproval evident in the tight set of his shoulders and the way he'd introduced Ethan to the Westbrook executives with a pointed, "He's sorry he can't join us for dinner tonight due to a personal commitment." Ethan pushed those concerns aside as he drove to the elementary school, a small bouquet of flowers for each girl on the passenger seat beside him. He'd chosen cheerful yellow daisies for Emma and vibrant purple irises for Lily, having learned their favorite colors over the past weeks. The school parking lot was already filling up when he arrived, parents and grandparents streaming toward the gymnasium where the play would be held. Ethan felt a momentary hesitation. He'd never attended a school function before, had no idea of the protocols or expectations, but the thought of Lily and Emma waiting for him propelled him forward. He found Sarah in the hallway outside the gym, her color much improved after weeks of treatment. She was wearing a simple blue dress, her red hair pulled back with a clip, and Ethan was struck by how beautiful she looked. "You made it," she said, relief evident in her voice. "Of course," Ethan replied. "How are they? Nervous?" Sarah laughed. "Lily is cool as a cucumber, totally in character as the tortoise. Emma's been pacing backstage, practicing her lines over and over. They'll be so happy you're here." She led him backstage, where children in various animal costumes were being corralled by harried-looking teachers. Emma spotted them first, her face lighting up as she ran over in her narrator's costume, a simple blue dress with a paper star pinned to her chest. "You came!" she exclaimed, throwing her arms around Ethan's waist. "I promised I would," Ethan said, hugging her back and presenting her with the yellow daisies. "These are for you." Emma's eyes widened as she took the flowers. "They're my favorite color. How did you know?" "I pay attention," Ethan said with a wink. Lily appeared next, walking deliberately slowly in her tortoise costume, which consisted of a green sweater with a cardboard shell attached to the back. She grinned when she saw Ethan, breaking character to run the last few steps. "Do I look like a real tortoise?" she asked, spinning around to show off her costume. "The most convincing tortoise I've ever seen," Ethan assured her, presenting her with the purple irises. "These are for you to celebrate your stage debut." Lily clutched the flowers to her chest, beaming. "I'm going to win the race," she confided in a stage whisper. "But don't tell anyone. It's supposed to be a surprise." Ethan bit back a smile. "Your secret is safe with me." A teacher called all the children to line up, and Ethan and Sarah wished the girls good luck before finding seats in the gymnasium. The chairs were small and uncomfortable, clearly designed for people much smaller than Ethan's 6'2" frame, but he didn't care. He was exactly where he needed to be. The play was predictably amateur. Forgotten lines, costume malfunctions, one child bursting into tears when the spotlight hit him. But Ethan watched with rapt attention. Emma delivered her lines clearly, and confidently, standing straight with her hands clasped in front of her. Lily moved with exaggerated slowness as the tortoise, drawing laughs from the audience with her determined expression. When Lily crossed the finish line ahead of the hare, who had fallen asleep mid-race, the audience erupted in applause. Ethan clapped until his hands hurt, a ridiculous grin splitting his face. Beside him, Sarah was taking pictures with her phone, her own smile wide and proud. "They were amazing," Ethan whispered, leaning toward her. Sarah nodded, her eyes suspiciously bright. They were, weren't they? After the play, they took the girls out for ice cream to celebrate, the twins chattering excitedly about their performances and accepting compliments from other families who recognized them from the show. Ethan sat across from them in the ice cream parlor, watching as they demolished their sundaes, chocolate smeared around their mouths and happiness radiating from their faces. "Thank you for coming," Sarah said quietly, while the girls were distracted by a game on the kids' menu. It meant the world to them. "Thank you for letting me be there," Ethan replied. "I wouldn't have missed it for anything." Later that night, after dropping Sarah and the girls off at their apartment, Ethan drove home to his penthouse. As he rode the elevator up to his floor, he pulled out his phone to check his messages. There were several missed calls from Victor and a terse text. "Call me when you're done playing Happy Families. We need to talk." Ethan sighed, pocketing his phone, without responding. Whatever Victor wanted to discuss could wait until tomorrow. Tonight belonged to the memory of his daughters on a stage, their faces shining with pride as they took their bows. When he entered his penthouse, the emptiness struck him anew. The sleek, minimalist space that had once seemed sophisticated now felt sterile and lifeless. There were no crayon drawings on the refrigerator, no small shoes cluttering the entryway, no sounds of children's laughter echoing off the walls. For the first time, Ethan allowed himself to imagine a different future, one where this wasn't his home anymore, where he lived somewhere that Lily and Emma could have their own rooms, where Sarah might eventually... He cut that thought short, reminding himself not to get ahead of reality. Sarah had allowed him into their lives, but there was no indication she wanted anything more than co-parenting from him, and he had no right to expect more, not after the way he'd ended things 7 years ago. Still, as he got ready for bed, the image of the four of them at the ice cream parlor lingered in his mind, not just a man visiting his children, but a family, sharing in a simple moment of joy together. The morning after the school play, Ethan arrived at his office earlier than usual, determined to catch up on work he'd been delegating or postponing over the past weeks. He was reviewing quarterly projections when Victor walked in without knocking, closing the door firmly behind him. "You missed quite a dinner last night," Victor said, settling into the chair across from Ethan's desk without waiting for an invitation. "I'm sure it was lovely," Ethan replied evenly, not looking up from his computer screen. "Did everyone sign the final papers?" "Yes, no thanks to you." Victor drummed his fingers on the armrest. "The Westbrook CEO asked where you were. I had to make excuses about a family emergency." "It wasn't an emergency, but it was family," Ethan said, finally meeting Victor's gaze. "And it was important. More important than the deal we've been working toward for 2 years," Victor challenged. "More important than the future of this company?" In that moment, yes. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Look, Victor, I understand you're upset, but the acquisition is complete, the papers are signed, and life goes on. What's really bothering you here?" Victor's jaw tightened. "What's bothering me is watching my best friend and business partner throw away everything we've built for some ready-made family that dropped into his lap 6 weeks ago." "I'm not throwing anything away," Ethan said, keeping his tone measured despite the anger rising within him. "I'm trying to balance my responsibilities, both to the company and to my daughters." "And what happens when you can't balance them anymore?" Victor pressed. "When you have to choose? Because that day is coming, Ethan, sooner than you think." "Why does it have to be a choice?" Ethan asked, genuinely puzzled by Victor's insistence on framing it as an either-or proposition. Victor sighed, his expression softening slightly. "Because that's how life works. You can't be in two places at once. You can't give 100% to both your company and your new family situation. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. I've seen it happen before. My father tried to run his business and be there for every Little League game and piano recital. Know what happened? The business failed and we nearly lost our house. Some things just aren't compatible, Ethan. Ethan considered this. He and Victor had been friends since college, and he knew that Victor's childhood had been marked by financial instability following his father's business failures. It explained some of Victor's ruthless focus on success, his aversion to anything that might be seen as a distraction. I appreciate your concern, Ethan said carefully, but this is something I need to figure out for myself. I can't just ignore my children because it might be better for business. Victor stood, straightening his suit jacket. Just be careful, Ethan. That woman and those kids, they've got a lot to gain from you. A lifetime of financial security, social connections, opportunities they could never have otherwise. Make sure you're not being played. That's enough, Ethan said sharply, rising to his feet. Sarah has never asked me for money. In fact, she's been reluctant to accept my help at all, and the girls don't even know I'm their father yet, so they're certainly not after my bank account. Victor held up his hands in a placating gesture. Fine, just looking out for you, that's all. He moved toward the door, then paused. By the way, the board wants to meet next week to discuss the post-acquisition strategy. They'll expect you to be there, in person, the whole time. After Victor left, Ethan sank back into his chair, a headache forming behind his eyes. The board meeting was scheduled for the same day as Emma and Lily's end-of-year field trip to the Seattle Aquarium. He'd already promised to be one of the parent chaperones, a commitment that had thrilled the girls beyond measure. This was exactly the kind of conflict Victor had predicted, the first of many, Ethan suspected. How was he supposed to balance being a CEO and being a father? Was Victor right that he would eventually have to choose? The question lingered in his mind throughout the day, distracting him during meetings and phone calls. By late afternoon, he'd made a decision. He'd attend the board meeting, but he'd make it clear that he needed to leave by noon to fulfill his commitment to his daughter's school. The board would just have to understand that their CEO was now a father with responsibilities beyond the company. When he arrived at Sarah's apartment that evening, he found her sitting on the couch, her face pale and drawn. The twins were nowhere in sight. What's wrong? He asked immediately, sitting beside her. Are you feeling ill again? Sarah shook her head, twisting her hands in her lap. My parents are coming to visit, she said, her voice tight with tension. They called this afternoon. They'll be here tomorrow. Ethan tried to recall what Sarah had told him about her parents. They lived in Portland, if he remembered correctly, and had never been particularly supportive of her decision to keep the twins and raise them on her own. Is that a bad thing? He asked cautiously. Sarah laughed, a short, humorless sound. My parents have never approved of any decision I've made. They wanted me to give the twins up for adoption when I told them I was pregnant. They said I was throwing my life away keeping them. She looked up at him, her eyes troubled. And they absolutely hated you even though they never met you. Me? Ethan was taken aback. Why? Because in their version of the story, you were the irresponsible playboy who got their daughter pregnant and abandoned her, Sarah explained. I never corrected them because, well, at the time that's what I thought too. I didn't know about Martha's interference. Ethan nodded slowly, processing this. And they don't know I'm back in the picture now? No, Sarah admitted. I haven't told them, but the girls will the moment they arrive. They've been so excited about you, about Buddy, about the school play. They'll tell my parents everything within 5 minutes of them walking through the door. And you're worried about how your parents will react. Sarah nodded, leaning back against the couch cushions. They're very protective of the girls, and of me, in their own controlling way. When they find out you're back in our lives, they're going to have a lot of questions and concerns. Do you want me to stay away while they're here? Ethan asked, though the thought of not seeing the twins for however long the visit lasted was painful. No, Sarah said firmly. You're part of our lives now. The girls would be devastated if you suddenly disappeared, even temporarily. I just wanted to warn you. My parents can be difficult." "I can handle difficult," Ethan assured her, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "Don't worry." Sarah's parents arrived the following afternoon. Ethan had arranged to leave work early, stopping to pick up flowers for Sarah's mother and a bottle of good scotch for her father, peace offerings that he hoped might soften their initial reaction to him. When he knocked on the apartment door, it was opened by a petite woman with Sarah's red hair streaked with grey and cut in a severe bob. She looked him up and down, her expression immediately cooling when she realized who he must be. "You must be Ethan," she said, her tone clipped. "I'm Linda Reynolds, Sarah's mother." "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Reynolds," Ethan said, extending his hand. "Sarah's told me a lot about you." Linda ignored his hand, turning to call over her shoulder, "Robert, he's here." A tall, broad-shouldered man with a closely trimmed beard appeared behind her, his arm protectively around Sarah, who looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. "So you're the one," Robert said, his voice low and controlled, but with an undercurrent of anger. "The man who walked away from my daughter and granddaughters for 6 years. Before Ethan could respond, Emma and Lily came barreling down the hallway, Buddy at their heels. "Mr. Ethan!" they cried in unison, pushing past their grandparents to hug him around the waist. "Did you bring Buddy his new toy?" Lily asked, looking up at him expectantly. "I did," Ethan confirmed, reaching into his pocket for the small, squeaky ball he'd bought for the puppy. "And I brought something for your grandparents, too." He presented the flowers and scotch, which Linda and Robert accepted with stiff politeness. The atmosphere in the small apartment was tense, the adults circling each other warily while the twins, oblivious to the undercurrents, chattered excitedly about showing their grandparents the tricks they'd taught Buddy. Over dinner, takeout from Sarah's favorite Thai restaurant, which Ethan had arranged, Robert began his interrogation. "So, Ethan," he said, setting down his fork with deliberate care, "Sarah tells us you run some kind of tech company." "Yes, Horizon Tech," Ethan replied. "We develop software for healthcare systems." "Must be lucrative," Robert observed, his tone suggesting this was not necessarily a compliment. "It's been successful," Ethan acknowledged. "We employ about 300 people now." "And you had no idea about the twins until recently?" Linda interjected, her skepticism evident. "A smart businessman like you never thought to check if your relationship with our daughter had consequences?" Ethan felt Sarah tense beside him. They'd agreed to tell her parents the truth about Martha's deception, but clearly they weren't inclined to believe it. "Mom," Sarah said warningly, "we've explained what happened. My messages never reached Ethan because his assistant intercepted them." "Convenient," Linda muttered. "It's the truth," Ethan said firmly. "I would never have knowingly abandoned my children, or Sarah." Robert studied him over the rim of his glasses. "And now, what are your intentions now, Mr. Mitchell? Because those little girls have been through enough. They don't need someone waltzing in and out of their lives whenever it suits his schedule." "I intend to be a permanent part of their lives," Ethan said without hesitation. "I've missed 6 years I can never get back. I don't plan to miss anymore." "And what about your relationship with our daughter?" Linda asked bluntly. "What exactly is going on there?" Sarah choked on her water, and Ethan felt heat rise to his face. "We're co-parenting," he said carefully, "focusing on what's best for Emma and Lily." Linda's eyebrows rose. "Just co-parenting, living in separate homes. That seems complicated for the girls in the long run." "Mom?" Sarah exclaimed, her cheeks flushing. We haven't. It's none of your business." "Everything concerning our granddaughters is our business," Robert said firmly. "We just want to make sure they're not going to be hurt." "I would never hurt them," Ethan said, his voice low and intense. "Or Sarah. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I'm asking you to give me a chance to prove myself." Robert and Linda exchanged a look, decades of marriage allowing them to communicate without words. Finally, Robert turned back to Ethan. "Actions. Speak louder than words, Mr. Mitchell. We'll be watching to see if you follow through on these promises." After dinner, while Sarah was putting the twins to bed, Ethan found himself alone in the kitchen with Robert, who was drying dishes as Ethan washed them. "Sarah says you've been paying for her medical treatments," Robert said abruptly. "Yes," Ethan confirmed, handing him a plate to dry. "It's the least I can do." Robert was silent for a moment, methodically wiping the plate. "Linda and I offered to help when she first got sick. She refused, said she could handle it on her own." He set the plate down carefully. "She's always been stubborn, independent, to a fault. Never wants to feel like she's taking charity." "I've noticed," Ethan said with a small smile. "It took a lot of convincing for her to let me help with the treatments. But she let you help," Robert said thoughtfully. "That says something." They finished the dishes in silence, an unspoken truce forming between them. Later, as Ethan prepared to leave, Robert followed him to the door. "My wife and I raised Sarah to be strong and self-sufficient," he said quietly. "Maybe too much so. She's been carrying this burden alone for too long, thinking she had to prove something to us, to herself." He fixed Ethan with a stern look. "Don't make her carry it alone anymore. But don't you dare break her heart again either." "I won't," Ethan promised, meaning it more than perhaps any promise he'd ever made. As he drove home that night, Ethan's mind raced with all that had happened in the past few weeks. His life had been turned upside down in ways he never could have anticipated. But for the first time in years, he felt truly alive, connected to something real and meaningful. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Sorry about my parents. They're protective, but they mean well." He smiled, typing back, "No need to apologize. They love you and the girls. I can respect that." A moment later, another text came through. "The girls want to know if you're still coming to the aquarium on Tuesday." Ethan thought about the board meeting, about Victor's warnings, about the choice he would eventually have to make. "Wouldn't miss it for the world," he replied. And he meant it. The day of the board meeting and the aquarium field, trip dawned with typical Seattle drizzle, the gray sky seeming to mirror Ethan's internal conflict. He dressed carefully in one of his best suits for the meeting, but packed jeans and a casual shirt in his car for the field trip afterward. As he drove to the office, his phone rang through the car's speakers. Sarah's name flashed on the display. "Good morning," he answered, trying to sound more cheerful than he felt. "Ethan," Sarah's voice was strained, tight with worry. "I hate to do this, but I need to ask a huge favor." "Anything," he said immediately, concern sharpening his focus. "What's wrong?" "I'm at the emergency room," Sarah said, and Ethan's heart lurched. "Don't worry," she added quickly, sensing his panic. "It's not serious, just some complications from the anemia, but the doctor wants to run tests and they're going to keep me here for most of the day." "I'll be right there," Ethan said, already calculating the fastest route to the hospital. "No, that's not what I'm calling about," Sarah interrupted. "The girls' field trip is today, and I was supposed to be one of the chaperones. I called the school and they said they can't go without enough parent volunteers. The girls will be heartbroken if they miss it." "You want me to step in as a chaperone?" Ethan guessed, his stomach sinking as he thought of the board meeting. "I know it's last minute and I know you have that important meeting today," Sarah said apologetically. "But my parents had to fly back to Portland this morning. My dad has a doctor's appointment he couldn't reschedule. There's no one else I can ask." Ethan took a deep breath, weighing his options. The board meeting was crucial. The directors would be discussing the future direction of the company post-acquisition, including leadership roles and strategic priorities. His absence would be noted and criticized, possibly undermining his position as CEO. But the thought of Emma and Lily missing their field trip, something they'd been looking forward to for weeks, was equally unthinkable. "I'll handle it," he said finally. "Don't worry about the girls or the field trip. Just focus on getting better." "Are you sure?" Sarah asked, relief evident in her voice. "I know how important your meeting is." "The girls are important too," Ethan said simply. "Text me the details for the field trip and I'll make it work, and keep me updated on how you're doing." After hanging up, Ethan immediately called his assistant. "Janet, I need you to reschedule the board meeting." "Mr. Mitchell, the directors are already on their way," Janet replied, her voice tense. "Some of them flew in specifically for this meeting." Ethan swore under his breath. Then I need you to set up a video conference. I'll attend the first part remotely, but I have a family emergency and won't be there in person. There was a pause. Mr. Chambers instructed me to remind you that this meeting requires your physical presence. He was quite insistent. Of course, Victor would try to force his hand. Well, Mr. Chambers isn't the CEO, is he? Ethan said, his patience wearing thin. Set up the video conference, Janet, and let the board know I'll join them in person for the afternoon session, but the morning will have to be remote. He turned his car around, heading toward the elementary school instead of the office. As he drove, he called Victor directly. "Where are you?" Victor demanded by way of greeting. "The meeting starts in 40 minutes and you're not here." "I have a family situation," Ethan said firmly. "I'll be attending the morning session via video conference and I'll be there in person after lunch." "Are you kidding me?" Victor's voice rose. "Ethan, this is the most important board meeting of the year. Your family situation can wait a few hours." "No, it can't," Ethan replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I've made my decision, Victor. I'll see you this afternoon." He hung up before Victor could protest further, a mixture of anxiety and resolve churning in his stomach. For the first time in his career, he was putting family before business when the stakes were high. The realization was both terrifying and strangely liberating. At the elementary school, Ethan found Emma and Lily waiting with their class, small backpacks on their shoulders and worried expressions on their faces. "Mr. Ethan!" Emma cried when she spotted him, relief washing over her features. "Mom said she had to go to the hospital. Is she okay?" "She's fine," Ethan assured them both, kneeling down to their level. "The doctors just want to run some tests to make sure she's getting better, and I'm going to be your chaperone for the aquarium today." Lily's eyes widened. "Really? But what about your super important meeting? Mom said you had to talk to all the bosses today." Ethan smiled, touched that Sarah had explained his work commitments to the girls. "I'm going to do both," he said, pulling out his tablet. "I'll have my meeting on this while we're on the bus, and then I'll be all yours at the aquarium. How does that sound?" "Cool," the twins exclaimed in unison. The teacher, a young woman with a harried expression, approached them. "Mr. Mitchell, Sarah called to say you'd be filling in for her. Thank you so much for stepping up on such short notice. We couldn't have gone without another parent volunteer." "Happy to help," Ethan said, signing the forms she handed him. "Just to warn you, I'll need to participate in a video conference on the bus ride there. Will that be a problem?" The teacher shook her head. "Not at all. The ride is about 30 minutes and the kids usually watch a nature documentary to prepare them for what they'll see at the aquarium. You can have your meeting while they're watching." As they boarded the bus, Ethan settled into a seat near the back, the twins sitting across the aisle from him so he could have some privacy for his meeting. He set up his tablet, connected his earbuds and logged into the video conference just as it was beginning. The faces of the board members appeared on his screen, their expressions ranging from curiosity to disapproval as they realized he was joining remotely. Victor sat at the head of the table in the boardroom, his face carefully neutral, though Ethan could see the tension in his jaw. "Gentlemen, ladies, thank you for your understanding," Ethan began, speaking quietly into his microphone. "I apologize for not being there in person this morning, but I had a family emergency that couldn't be postponed. I'll join you at the office after lunch." The chairman of the board, an older man named Lawrence Barrett, cleared his throat. "While we appreciate family commitments, Mr. Mitchell, this is a crucial meeting for the future of Horizon Tech. Your physical presence would have been preferred." "I understand, and I assure you that I am fully engaged and prepared for today's discussions," Ethan replied smoothly. "Now shall we proceed with the agenda?" The meeting began with presentations on the integration plan for Westbrook's operations, financial projections for the next fiscal year, and strategic priorities moving forward. Ethan participated actively, asking questions and offering insights, despite the less-than-ideal circumstances of sitting on a school bus surrounded by excited first graders. Halfway through a discussion about international expansion, the bus hit a pothole, jolting Ethan and causing his tablet to slip. Emma caught it before it could fall to the floor, handing it back to him with a proud smile. "Thank you," Ethan mouthed silently, giving her a thumbs up. The board members, who had witnessed the exchange through the video feed, exchanged glances. Victor looked particularly displeased, while Lawrence Barrett raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Is that your daughter, Ethan?" Lawrence asked during a pause in the discussion. Ethan hesitated only briefly. "Yes," he said, feeling a surge of pride as he publicly acknowledged Emma as his child for the first time. "That's Emma, one of my twin daughters. I'm chaperoning their class field trip to the aquarium today, which is why I couldn't be there in person this morning." There was a moment of stunned silence. Most of the board members knew Ethan as a confirmed bachelor, entirely dedicated to the company with no family commitments to distract him. "I wasn't aware you had children," Lawrence said carefully. "It's a recent discovery," Ethan replied, seeing no reason to hide the truth. "I found out 6 weeks ago that I have 6-year-old twin daughters. I've been adjusting my schedule to be part of their lives, while continuing to fulfill my responsibilities to Horizon Tech." Victor cleared his throat loudly. "Perhaps we should return to the matter at hand," he suggested, his voice tight. "We can discuss Ethan's personal situation another time." The meeting continued, but Ethan could sense a shift in the dynamics. Some board members seemed sympathetic, others confused or concerned. Victor became increasingly tense. His responses clipped, and his glances at Ethan through the screen cold with disapproval. When they finally reached the aquarium and the bus parked, Ethan wrapped up his participation in the meeting. "I'll see you all at the office around 1 o'clock, he promised. "Thank you for your understanding." As he disconnected, he saw Victor mouth something that looked suspiciously like, "You're making a huge mistake." Ethan pushed those concerns aside as he helped the teacher organize the children into groups. He was assigned Emma, Lily, and 3 of their classmates, a responsibility he took seriously, counting heads repeatedly as they moved through the exhibits. The aquarium was a magical experience through the eyes of 6-year-olds. The twins were enthralled by the jellyfish, mesmerized by their ghostly, pulsing movements in the blue-lit tanks. They pressed their small hands against the glass of the main tank, gasping as sharks glided by with prehistoric grace. "Dad, look at that one," Emma cried, pointing to a particularly large shark. Ethan froze, his heart skipping a beat. It was the first time either of the girls had called him Dad instead of Mr. Ethan. Emma seemed to realize what she'd said at the same moment, her eyes widening as she clapped a hand over her mouth. "I'm sorry," she whispered, suddenly uncertain. "Mom said we're not supposed to call you that yet." Ethan knelt down beside her, his throat tight with emotion. "It's okay, Emma," he said softly. "You can call me whatever you feel comfortable with." "Are you really our dad?" Lily asked, moving closer, her voice serious and her eyes, so like his own, searching his face. "Tommy in our class said you look like us, and that's why you come to our house all the time." Ethan looked from one small face to the other, aware that this was a pivotal moment. Sarah had wanted to wait until the girls were ready, but it seemed that moment had arrived, ready or not. "Yes," he said simply. "I am your dad, but I didn't know about you until recently, which is why I wasn't in your lives before. If I had known, I would have been there from the very beginning." "Why didn't you know about us?" Emma asked, her brow furrowed in confusion. "It's complicated," Ethan said, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes or things happen that keep families apart. But the important thing is that I know about you now, and I love you both very much." "So you're not going to go away again?" Lily asked, her voice small. "No," Ethan promised firmly. "I'm not going anywhere, ever." The twins exchanged a look, seeming to communicate silently in the way that only twins can. Then, with the straightforward acceptance that children often show, they each took one of his hands. "Can we see the octopus now?" Emma asked, as if the matter was settled. "Absolutely," Ethan agreed, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. As they walked toward the octopus exhibit, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was Janet, his assistant. "Mr. Mitchell, the board is asking when you'll be arriving. Mr. Chambers seems particularly anxious about your return." Ethan looked at his watch. It was already past noon. If he left now, he could make it to the office by 1 as promised. But the field trip wasn't scheduled to end until 3. "Tell them I'll be there as soon as I can," he said, making a decision. "Family emergency is taking longer than expected." He put his phone away, ignoring the subsequent buzzing that indicated multiple incoming messages, likely from Victor. Today, he was just a dad taking his daughters to see the octopus. The bored Victor and Horizon Tech would have to wait. By the time they returned to the school, it was after 3, and Ethan's phone had been buzzing constantly for the past hour. He helped the teacher ensure all the children were picked up by their parents or guardians, then took the twins to his car. "Where are we going?" Lily asked as he buckled her into the back seat. "Home or to see Mom?" "We're going to see Mom first," Ethan assured them. "I want to make sure she's okay, and I'm sure she's anxious to hear all about your adventures at the aquarium." At the hospital, they found Sarah looking pale but much improved, sitting up in bed and working on her laptop. "Mom!" the twins cried, in unison, rushing to hug her carefully. "My babies," Sarah said, her face lighting up as she embraced them. "Did you have a good time at the aquarium?" As the girls launched into an excited recounting of everything they'd seen, complete with dramatic reenactments of fish movements, Ethan stood back watching the 3 of them together. This was his family. Unexpected, imperfect, still finding its way, but undeniably his. When the twins took a break to explore the hospital room, opening drawers and examining equipment with curious fingers, Sarah turned to Ethan. "Thank you," she said softly, "for stepping in today. I know it meant missing your meeting." "I didn't miss it entirely," Ethan admitted. "I attended via video conference from the school bus." Sarah's eyebrows rose. "That couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't," Ethan agreed with a rueful smile, "but it was worth it." He hesitated, then added, "There's something you should know. Emma called me Dad at the aquarium. It just slipped out. And then they both asked if I was really their father." Sarah's eyes widened. "What did you say?" "I told them the truth," Ethan said, "that I am their father, but that I didn't know about them until recently. I hope that was okay." Sarah was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. It was bound to happen sooner or later. How did they take it? With surprising ease, Ethan said, still amazed by their acceptance, "Kids are remarkably adaptable." "Yes, they are," Sarah agreed, watching the twins with a tender expression. "Much more so than adults, sometimes." Ethan's phone buzzed yet again. This time it was a text from Victor. "Board vote in 30 minutes. Be here or face the consequences." The cryptic message sent a chill down Ethan's spine. What vote? There had been nothing on the agenda about a vote when he'd reviewed the meeting materials. "I have to go," he told Sarah reluctantly. "There's some kind of emergency at work." Sarah nodded in understanding. "Go, we'll be fine. The doctor says I can go home this evening." Ethan kissed the twins goodbye, promising to see them the next day, then raced to his car. As he drove toward the Horizon Tech offices, his mind raced with possibilities. What was Victor up to? And what consequences was he threatening? He pulled into the parking garage with tires squealing, rushed through the lobby, and took the elevator to the top floor where the boardroom was located. As the doors opened, Janet was waiting for him, her expression grave. "Mr. Mitchell," she said urgently, "they're voting on whether to remove you as CEO." Ethan stood frozen in the hallway, Janet's words echoing in his mind. Remove him as CEO. The company he'd built from nothing, the vision he'd pursued for over a decade. They were voting to take it all away. "How is this possible?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "They can't call a vote like this without proper notice." "Mr. Chambers invoked the emergency provision in the corporate bylaws," Janet explained quickly. "He claimed your absence today demonstrated a pattern of neglect that posed an imminent threat to the company's stability." Ethan's shock gave way to anger. Victor had orchestrated this, deliberately scheduling the vote when he knew Ethan was dealing with a family emergency. It was a calculated power play, one that revealed just how far his old friend was willing to go to get what he wanted. "Who's in there?" Ethan asked, striding toward the boardroom. "All 11 board members, including Mr. Chambers," Janet replied, hurrying to keep up with him. They've been in closed session for the past 20 minutes. Ethan paused at the boardroom door, taking a deep breath to compose himself. This was perhaps the most important meeting of his career, one that would determine not just his professional future, but his ability to provide for his newfound family. He pushed open the door and walked in with deliberate calm, all eyes turning to him as conversation abruptly ceased. Victor sat at the far end of the table, his expression a mixture of surprise and something that looked almost like regret. "Gentlemen, ladies," Ethan said, nodding to the board members as he moved to the empty chair at the head of the table. "I understand you're discussing my leadership of this company. I'd appreciate the courtesy of being included in that conversation." Lawrence Barrett, the board chairman, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Ethan, we were just expressing concerns about your recent change in priorities. Victor has raised some compelling points about your decreased engagement with the company over the past few weeks." "And what points might those be?" Ethan asked, his gaze fixed on Victor. Victor met his eyes without flinching. "That you've been increasingly absent, distracted, delegating critical responsibilities, missing key meetings like today's, that your newfound family situation is affecting your ability to lead this company effectively." "I see," Ethan said quietly. He looked around the table at the faces of his board members, some apologetic, others calculating, a few genuinely concerned. These were people who had invested in his vision, who had trusted him to build something valuable. They deserved honesty. "Everything Victor has said is true," he admitted, causing a ripple of surprise around the table. "I have been adjusting my schedule, delegating more responsibilities, and yes, occasionally missing meetings, because 6 weeks ago, I discovered I have twin daughters I never knew existed." He paused, letting that sink in. "Their mother tried to tell me about the pregnancy 7 years ago, but my executive assistant intercepted her messages, believing she was protecting me from a distraction. So for 6 years, my daughters grew up without a father, and I had no idea they existed." The room was silent, all eyes fixed on him as he continued. "When I found them, I made a promise to them, to their mother, and to myself that I would be present in their lives, that I would be the father they deserve. And yes, that has meant changes to how I operate as CEO, but I would argue that those changes have made me a better leader, not a worse one." Victor scoffed. "A better leader? You missed half of today's board meeting to chaperone a field trip." "I missed half of today's meeting because their mother was hospitalized," Ethan corrected calmly. "And yes, I chose to step in and chaperone their field trip rather than leave 26-year-olds stranded without enough supervision. I'd make the same choice again tomorrow." He leaned forward, addressing the entire board now. "But here's what you may not have considered. While adapting to fatherhood, I've also overseen the largest acquisition in our company's history. I've approved the development of 2 new product lines. I've maintained relationships with our top clients, and our stock price has increased by 12%. Ethan stood, placing his palms flat on the table. "I'm not the same CEO I was 6 weeks ago. I don't work until midnight every day. I don't come in on Sundays. I take time to have dinner with my daughters, to help them with homework, to be there when they need me. And you know what? That perspective, that balance, has made me more efficient, more focused, and more clear-sighted about what really matters." He turned to Victor. "You think family and business are incompatible, that you have to choose one or the other, but what if that's wrong? What if being a good father actually makes me a better CEO? What if understanding that there are things more important than quarterly earnings gives me the perspective to make decisions that are truly in the long-term interest of this company?" Victor shook his head. "That's a lovely sentiment, Ethan, but business doesn't work that way. Leadership requires sacrifice, focus, singular dedication." "Does it?" Ethan challenged. "Or is that just what we've been telling ourselves to justify missing out on the things that really matter?" He looked around the table. "How many of you have missed your children's birthdays for a business meeting? How many have postponed vacations, skipped anniversaries, been absent during important moments in your family's lives, all in the name of dedication to the job?" Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "I'm not suggesting we neglect our responsibilities," Ethan continued. I'm suggesting we redefine what good leadership looks like, that we create a company culture that values whole, balanced human beings, starting at the top. Lawrence Barrett, who had been listening intently, cleared his throat. Those are admirable sentiments, Ethan, but practically speaking, how do you propose to balance these competing demands on your time and attention? By building stronger teams, Ethan replied without hesitation. By delegating more effectively. By focusing on the decisions that only I can make and empowering others to handle the rest. He paused. And by being honest with all of you about my limitations and commitments. He turned to face Victor directly. I understand your concerns, Victor. You've been my friend and partner from the beginning, and you've always believed in absolute dedication to the company. But I've discovered there's room in my life for more than one priority. I can be both a good CEO and a good father. I intend to prove that to you, to all of you, if you'll give me the chance. The room fell silent as the board members exchanged glances. Finally, Lawrence spoke. I believe we need to deliberate on this matter privately. Ethan, Victor, would you both step outside for a few minutes? In the hallway, Ethan and Victor stood apart, the tension between them palpable. Decades of friendship, now strained to the breaking point by fundamentally different visions of life and leadership. You knew what you were doing, Ethan said quietly, calling that vote when I was at the hospital with Sarah and the girls. Victor didn't deny it. I did what I thought was necessary for the good of the company. The company we built together, Ethan. The company you seem willing to risk for a family you barely know. They're my daughters, Victor, my flesh and blood. And Horizon is your legacy, Victor countered, his voice rising with emotion. Everything we've worked for, everything we've sacrificed for. You're willing to jeopardize it all for what? To play house with your ex-fling and her kids? Our kids, Ethan corrected firmly. And I'm not jeopardizing anything. I'm trying to have both, a meaningful career and a meaningful family life. Why does that threaten you so much? Victor ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. Because I've seen it happen before. My father tried to have both and he failed at both. The business collapsed and he was still a lousy father because he was always stressed, always torn between competing priorities. Ethan's expression softened as understanding dawned. This isn't about me at all, is it? It's about your father. Victor looked away, unwilling to acknowledge the truth in Ethan's words. Before he could respond, the boardroom door opened, and Lawrence beckoned them back inside. We've reached a decision, the chairman announced as Ethan and Victor took their seats. While we have concerns about the recent changes in Ethan's leadership approach, we also recognize his substantial contributions to this company and his ongoing commitment to its success. Lawrence turned to Ethan. We're not voting to remove you as CEO today. However, we are implementing some structural changes to ensure the company's continued stability. We're creating a new position of Chief Operations Officer to handle day-to-day management, allowing you to focus on strategic direction and key relationships. Ethan nodded slowly, absorbing this compromise. And who will fill this COO position? We'd like to offer it to Victor, Lawrence replied, with the understanding that you two will need to find a way to work together effectively, despite your personal differences. Ethan looked across the table at Victor, whose expression revealed nothing. It wasn't an ideal solution, but it was one he could live with, one that would allow him to maintain his leadership role while creating space for his family commitments. I accept those terms, Ethan said. Victor knows this company as well as I do. He'll make an excellent COO, assuming he wants the position. All eyes turned to Victor, who sat in silence for a long moment, considering. Finally, he gave a curt nod. I accept as well, for the good of the company. As the meeting concluded and the board members filed out, Ethan remained seated, processing everything that had happened. Victor lingered behind, approaching Ethan's chair with measured steps. This isn't how I wanted things to play out, Victor admitted quietly. Wasn't it? Ethan asked, looking up at his old friend. Victor sighed, sinking into the chair beside him. I thought I was protecting the company, protecting our vision. But maybe... He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. Maybe I was wrong about some things. Come to dinner, Ethan said suddenly. Meet Sarah properly, meet the girls. See for yourself what I've been trying to tell you. Victor looked surprised by the invitation. You want me to meet your family? After what I just tried to do? We've been friends for too long to let this come between us, Ethan said simply. And if we're going to work together as CEO and COO, we need to understand each other's perspectives. After a moment's hesitation, Victor nodded. All right, dinner it is. 2 weeks later, Ethan stood in the kitchen of a new house, a spacious, 4-bedroom home in a family-friendly neighborhood, halfway between Sarah's apartment and the Horizon Tech offices. He was making pancakes, Emma and Lily's favorite breakfast, while the twins set the table, carefully placing forks and napkins at each place. Sarah entered the kitchen, still looking sleepy in her robe and slippers, her red hair tousled around her face. Something smells amazing, she said, coming to peer over his shoulder at the griddle. Dad makes the best pancakes, Lily declared confidently, even though this was only the 3rd time Ethan had cooked breakfast for them. The secret is cinnamon. And the batter, Ethan stage whispered, winking at Sarah. The past 2 weeks had brought more changes to their lives. Sarah's doctors had declared her anemia under control, though she would need ongoing treatment. She'd found a new job closer to the girls' school, with better hours and health benefits, and Ethan had purchased this house, offering it as a place where they could all spend time together, whether or not Sarah and the girls eventually moved in permanently. Today was special. They were hosting a housewarming brunch for Sarah's parents, who had gradually warmed to Ethan after seeing his consistent presence in the girls' lives. Victor was coming too, along with a few close friends from both their circles. As Ethan flipped pancakes and listened to the twins chattering about their plans to show everyone the backyard treehouse he'd had built, he marveled at how completely his life had transformed in just a few months. The hollow emptiness that had plagued him that rainy night in his penthouse seemed like a distant memory now, replaced by a fullness of heart he'd never known was possible. The doorbell rang and the twins raced to answer it, Buddy barking excitedly, at their heels. Sarah moved to follow them, but Ethan caught her hand, pulling her gently back to him. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said, his voice low and serious. "These past few months have been incredible. Being with you and the girls, building this life together, it's everything I never knew I wanted." Sarah's expression softened, her green eyes warm as she looked up at him. "It's been pretty amazing. For us too," she admitted. "The girls adore you, and I—" She hesitated, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "I love you," Ethan said simply. "I think maybe I always did, even 7 years ago, when I was too blind to see what was right in front of me. I don't want to rush you, and I know we're still figuring all this out, but I want you to know that I'm all in. With you, with the girls, with this family we're building." Sarah's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she stood on tiptoe to kiss him softly. "I love you too," she whispered against his lips. "And I'm all in too." The sound of voices in the hallway broke them apart, and they turned to see the twins leading Robert and Linda into the kitchen, the girls talking over each other in their excitement to show their grandparents every feature of the new house. "Something's burning," Linda observed mildly, nodding toward the griddle where the forgotten pancake was now smoking slightly. Ethan laughed, quickly flipping the ruined pancake into the sink. "Sorry about that. Got a little distracted." Robert gave him a knowing look, his initial hostility now replaced with grudging acceptance. "Happens to the best of us," he said, clapping Ethan on the shoulder. As more guests arrived, Victor, looking awkward but determined, Sarah's friends. From work, a couple of Ethan's colleagues from Horizon. The house filled with conversation and laughter. Ethan moved through the rooms, refilling coffee cups and answering questions about the renovation plans, but his eyes kept finding Sarah, drawn to her like a compass finding north. Later, as their guests mingled on the back patio, Ethan found himself standing with Victor, watching the twins chase Buddy around the yard. "You were right," Victor said quietly, surprising Ethan. "About what?" "About balance. About it being possible to have both." Victor took a sip of his coffee, his gaze still on the girls. Seeing. You with them, with Sarah. You're different, calmer, more focused in a way. And the company hasn't suffered. In fact, our productivity metrics are up since we implemented the new leadership structure. Ethan smiled. Turns out being happy makes me better at my job. Who would have thought? Victor chuckled, shaking his head. I'm still not convinced it works for everyone, but for you. He gestured toward the scene before them. The beautiful house, the laughing children, the woman who was watching them both with a tender smile. For you, this is clearly the right path. As their guests began to depart, Ethan stood on the front porch with Sarah, his arm around her waist, watching as cars pulled away down the tree-lined street. The twins had finally exhausted themselves and were napping upstairs, Buddy curled between them on Lily's bed. So, Sarah said, leaning into his side, are you ready for this? For real family life with all its chaos and complications? Ethan thought about his journey, from the empty penthouse to this moment, standing on the porch of a home filled with love and laughter. From the man who valued nothing but success to the father who would miss a board meeting to chaperone a field trip. From someone who had everything and felt nothing to someone who had found what truly mattered. I've never been more ready for anything in my life, he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. As they turned to go back inside, Ethan took one last look at the house, at the bicycle with training wheels leaning against the garage, at the chalk drawings decorating the driveway, at the wind chimes the twins had picked out tinkling softly in the afternoon breeze. This was success, not the corner office or the impressive portfolio.